Hey guys, welcome back to Mantalk.ke, another episode. Thank you for engaging in the last one. We are back in Kofisi. We always come here and it's for good reason. They have amazing co-working spaces. Just one thing I say every episode is the jazz that plays during the day. If you're like me and you love that, come through. Hospitality is amazing, free coffee when you're a member. So the link's going to be down below. If you'd like to use a co-working space, please do. And we might bump into each other when we're here. This is the first interview of the season, and it's a very exciting one. I feel like we manifest things, Oscar. Here's why. A lot of the time, when we're planning a season, we just sort of say who,
Alas.
and then we just say it will happen. Universe, bring them. And the universe has complied. So as you can see on the wide lens, we have the fantastic Janet Mbugua here. Claps. Thank you so much for coming, Janet.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, Janet, first of all, before we even begin,
Here we go.
wow, you're so trendy. What's up? What's going on?
Oh,
There we go.
What's going
Thank
on?
you.
Wait, let's go. She has the Stan Smiths on.
I'll take it.
You know, she has the bomber jacket on.
The bomber jacket was for you guys, by
Hey.
the way. It was for Mantalk. Yeah, I mean, I enjoy style. I enjoy comfort, though. So as long as those two can be merged, then I have fun with it.
Nice, fun and practical.
Fun and practical.
There we go.
That's it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Oscar,
So-
I know you want to do it.
Yeah,
do
of
it?
course, I'm ready. I'm always ready. Guys. It's not every day you get, an author.
Here we go.
Let's start.
Strap in.
First of all, guys, I'll have you know that right next to me is the 1998 primary school champion, top debater.
Put some respect.
First, let's start with that. Number two, next thing that we have on my right side is I have a news anchor of repute, Citizen TV.
There we go.
I also have Pulse Radio at 19.
There it is.
On my right side. She has more titles. I think there's another one called, what's the name of the book, madam?
My first time.
Yeah, the first time.
Madam.
Yeah, and then she's also an actress for Pendo.
There we go. More
Yes.
titles
Yes,
than
you
the
see,
library.
listen,
There you
I
go.
could go on and on. I don't want to finish the interview.
I'm sweating.
I don't want to finish the interview. So, madam, with all these perspectives, all these fantastic, these many lives that you have lived, I even had you spend some time in Malaysia. Is this correct?
They do their research, props,
Yes.
some things. I'm like, how did you dig that out? I did spend time in Malaysia. I studied in Malaysia for about 2.5 years.
Excellent.
It was such an experience. It was culture shock, but again, I kind of quickly got over that and was able to make friends that I have right now.
Yeah.
We'd walk around like a mini UN, Indonesia, Japan, Singapore, Kenya, Botswana. So I made this really tight-knit group of friends.
Of international friends.
International friends, but it was just fun. We were actually really good friends and classmates and go out together, study together. So I have really fond memories. I modeled there as well because mom and dad were like, we've sent you to study. So however you've spent your pocket money and finished it is on you. And so I said, okay, I'll work. So they used to tell me, you could do this. So the university had a fashion department. And whenever the students made clothes, they'd have a fashion show. So I was among maybe 2 or 3 sort of like trophy black models, but still.
Still a
Still
trophy.
models.
Still a trophy. Still a
take
trophy. Still a trophy.
That's not what I was saying, Oscar. I promise. I wasn't trying to look for validation.
No, you just went there. No, you said.
But
a
I'll flip
trophy.
the ponytail.
Yeah, there it is. So, Mantalk as a podcast is obviously about like positive masculinity and the impact men have had, in society today. There's a lot of flack going around. Oh, men with podcasts. Oh, toxic masculinity and the definitions therein. I just wanted to know, because you've lived all these many lives, including being a trophy model. Hello. In Indonesia. What is the most positive thing that you've learned from the men in your life today?
That's a really good question. First of all, I think it's so great that there's platforms like this, male-led conversations from a male perspective. Because I think just like women, when we have platforms or conversations and then you see a panel, panel.
I like that.
But on topics that you feel you could have addressed better, we tend to get upset. But I like that, men can also say, we can lead with this because this is our lived truth. So I think it's amazing that you have this. I'm on a journey, by the way. You've caught me when I'm on a journey. And so a lot of what I'm realizing now is something that I'm now trying to put into practice and embrace. As somebody who's fought for women and girls for many years, and yet at the same time grown up around, in my opinion, positive masculinity, it's been sometimes people come and say, oh, what are you doing for the boy child? And I keep having to say, I've not discounted the boy child. But I feel like the issues I'm talking about are affecting women and girls more.
Yeah.
And that was from 2014. But even then, we'd include men and boys. Right now, it's a lot more intentional, where we're trying to have what are called male allies in the social justice space.
Yeah.
But it isn't that hard for me, I think, because I grew up with, I think my dad was one of the first feminists I ever encountered in my life. Just because I was never able to be, I was never limited to what I could be or who I could be. He was never the kind of person who was like, you can't do this. He always raised us saying, just do what you want to do, just do it well and work hard. Because I was, again, not that this is a term, a lot of terms are also being corrected of late, so that's fair. But I was a tomboy, really hardcore. 2 brothers. My older sister was much older, so I grew up around my twin brother and my older brother a lot. And so I grew up around boys and men, but most importantly, they treated me as an equal. And you see, when that happens from an early age, you're able to navigate life knowing that you're bringing your best, and not because you're a woman or because you're just bringing your best. But I really then began to see it in the workplace. When you're kind of told, oh, this isn't really for you, I think let's give it to your male colleague. So I didn't really know about things like gender inequality, etc., until I became older. But growing up around, like I say, the men in my life was a healthy upbringing. As I got older, like with most people and experiences, then you really begin to understand the different facets of who's a toxic person, who's a person who has toxic traits, because there's also a difference. And I think, I feel like I was going to ask Oscar, what was the question? Because I went.
You addressed it about
the men
in your life.
Yes.
Positive.
Yeah, and then now being able to not then have to push back on maybe men who I would encounter, whether it's in a relationship or not. Toxic masculinity, as the trend has come to be, it's worth, obviously validating, because it's a real thing. But there's also there's toxic people, men and women. There's toxic people, and so it's in trying not to negate everything that men do, and blanket condemnation and say all men are toxic. That's not true. Just the same way not all women are. And so I think it's important that we amplify that, so that it doesn't become a gender war, because sometimes it's always pitted as one. When in actual fact, no, there's some really great men and great women, and there's some really unhealthy men and unhealthy women. One thing, though, that is true that I've noticed is some gendered norms, whether it's the roles that women play in the home, etc., still exist. And then the pushback is, but I've evolved beyond that. Why are you still reducing me to being one-dimensional? That's when it becomes, and yet some people, men and women, truly believe it. I see it in the communities I go to and beyond, even in settings like, in urban trendy settings, as long as the mindset is no. A woman's role is not to lead. A woman's role is not to be a CEO. A woman's role is not to speak. Then that's when the pushback comes, because some people believe it, but a lot of us are saying, no, anyone can speak. It's whether you're male or female. But I think the conversation of toxic masculinity comes because those voices sometimes are so loud. And so I always say we need to be loud enough to silence the bullies, so that it doesn't harm on you guys who invite women to your space in a healthy way. I feel very safe on this space. There's not a lot of spaces I'd go to, because I'm like, but I know your mindset, and I know you don't even believe in what I'm doing, so I won't go. I feel like I've done all this to say, like I've gone down and round the bend and round to say that I feel like I've seen healthy, a healthy manifestation, if I can say that, of men for a long time. And I'm trying to pass that on to my sons and trying to get them to understand that it doesn't really matter who someone is if they have the ability. And now they say it, which is so great. If somebody says policeman, my older son would say police person. Wow. You know what I mean? But you have to...
You have to
normalize it.
You have to drum it into the sun.
And also for them to know, if somebody makes you feel invalidated, whether or not it's a man or a woman, you need to speak up. Whatever it is, whatever you can do, just so that somebody doesn't grow up holding on to a privilege that sometimes can be very harmful. Sometimes it can be used for good, but sometimes it can just be very, very harmful. So I don't know. The men in my life, I think, have shaped a lot. I have male mentors who've carried me in my career and who've actually helped me get to the next level just by being solid, firm mentors. When I was just a girl, coming into TV, and Joroge Maura, who was one of the legends of TV, sat me down and trained me. The first producer I had when I did a travel show, the same thing. And then there was people like Farida now, Karone, who became a mentor when I was, in another station. So I just tend to not try and look at it as male and female much. Sometimes it screams and shouts at you, but sometimes, you just have to take it at face value and say, this is an individual thing. It doesn't have much to do with their gender.
That is an incredible response.
Yeah.
In fact,
So long.
in fact, the fact that you started with, you literally walked us through your life journey and your interactions with men and how kind of they've impacted your perspective. You've taken us through motherhood as well. Then you've taken us through your career. So well done.
So thanks for watching Mantalk.
We're done now. Goodbye, everyone.
There's, as we mentioned, more titles in the library earlier. There's a certain level of excellence that you've achieved as an individual, Janet. And you've mentioned, your father, having brothers. I want to know, because as much as we're going to get into the social justice, I want to know about achieving as a woman, because there's a lot of ladies that watch this podcast and a lot of them look to you and your achievements that you've done. So I want to find out, you've mentioned your past and your growing up environment. What are some traits that you found from when you were a child and like your dad being a feminist, brothers, that have carried you to achieve what you have and then be able to give back? Because I feel like a lot of ladies would like that key.
Yeah,
that you might have,
that's a really good question. And it's funny because a lot of things came in hindsight, because you feel like you're just doing you, but then you realize that it's making a certain impact on somebody. So it makes you reflect, like, I wonder, because I've been in the industry now. I was in media from 2007 to 2017. So that was 10 years of being a news anchor. Took a break. I was supposed to go back. I remember even saying on air, see you later. I never went back, probably at some point. And it's only then is when you begin to realize, even now you're still doing events. There's still a relevance factor, which I don't take for granted. Right. But I think, I'm really, really fortunate to be somebody who grew up in a foundation that always pushed for excellence and hard work. Not even so much excellence at the time, but hard work, whether it was my parents, especially them. They've played a pretty big role. And sometimes it was in simple ways. Sometimes it was in how they showed up. Then you look at it and say, okay, and it was consistent, it was intentional. So that kind of, I guess, plants something in you. And so school tried to do the same thing. I'm interesting in that I'm a rebel and a moderate at the same time, trying to figure out. Life is still a journey, I'll figure it out. So I think that really helped. And then working for everything. That is one of the things I'm proudest of.
I love that.
So proud of. I don't, however, want to downplay how hard it is and how somebody feels like their only option is another. I do not obviously think it's the right way to go. As I've gotten older, it's just unfortunate that some people are held captive by having to make a choice to do something for their family. It's terrible. So I worked for everything I have. I started radio, but even the TV journey was interesting because I remember I'd come back from Malaysia and I needed work. I was like, I need a job. And so I remember my dad saying, you need to tarmac until your heels wear off.
Wow.
He said something like that. He's like, just keep looking for work until you get, he's like, there's no easier way. There's no easy. And that's literally what I did. I tarmacked. I was wearing these little kitten heels that eventually got worn off because I was tarmacking so much. I was going between this building and that building, trying to drop my,
you became the metaphor.
And quite literally. I took it quite literally.
And there was no LinkedIn.
There was no
there was no LinkedIn.
It was 2007. There was no LinkedIn, I think. And so having entered the industry through my own blood and sweat and every other work I did, whether it was career, whether it was, projects, I think that does something for you. And it then allows you to then, when you're there, for me at least anyway, hard work and the ability to, or just the responsibility of having something on you and what that comes with. Right. So ethics, work hard. The excellence one, again, I think was a little bit from my parents, a little bit from my dad. He's got a very interesting history of having spent time in different countries when he was a child because of what was happening in the country. Very interesting history, but it also made him this person who's very pedantic about timekeeping. honesty, and he's been, again, one of my greatest mentors, even in terms of investment. So I think a lot of it is what you see when you're growing up. The other one is the choice you make, because the opposite of showing up with excellence and working hard is, I think, missing out on opportunities because you chose not to show up. So you just ask yourself, what's fundamentally important to me? Is it the clout and everything that comes with it, or is it actually the longevity of working hard and letting my blood, sweat, and tears speak for me? What is fundamentally important to you? If it's the clout, also no judgment. Clout chase away, it's all good. If that's the thing,
not
fine.
sustainable,
Not
but
sustainable,
go ahead.
but go ahead. There you go. But if it's more important to saying, I believe in this because it's making me a better person, it's giving me more opportunities. That's the other thing that started happening. One thing would lead to another and another and another. And I was like, there's a trait here that's working for what I'm trying to do. And then people come back and be like, it's the way you show up professionally. It's the way you show up on time. It's the way you take your work seriously. And so, again, that informs you. And then finally, having, again, the values. Values are everything. Treat people well. The other day, I think Dame Helen Mirren was asked, how have you lasted this long in Hollywood? Are you allowed to cuss on this podcast? No, it's clean. Okay, never mind. I don't cuss even. But she said, okay, I'll try and sanitize what she said. But she said, show up on time and don't be a horrible person.
I got it. Yeah.
She's in her 70s. And I think what she was trying to say is, you guys complicate things. It's be decent. Show up. Extend courtesy. It's the little things that count for the bigger things, but no one wants to hear that because it's not sexy.
Exactly.
People are like, that's not sexy, Janet. Come on, give us something else. I'm like, no, it's actually basic values that I'm not saying I haven't messed up. I have big time. But then the thing about it is that it still brings you back. Even though you mess up, they're like, I'm just waiting for you to come back. Basic values, hard work, consistency, intentionality, trying to treat people well as well. The desiderata, read it.
There we go.
Just read the desiderata.
Please, it seems like you want to recite it. Don't even, the desiderata. It's okay. We have time. We have time. We can't even.
No. People forget that these old wise saying, people knew what they were trying to say when they were planting a seed of how to thrive. It's right there. It's always been there. We've just chosen to try and tweak it and modernize it. But it's like, no, it's relevant. It holds true in relationships, in work, in family. It holds true. I'm answering your question.
You are.
I feel like I'm going down.
There's an incredible.
Reel me in.
Please go. This is a podcast. We have time. I know you're used to. There's an ad coming. There's an ad running. No, there's no ads running.
There might be later on.
I was about to say, we've done 10-15 minutes. Are we not going on ad break? At some point, I'll just be quiet, and then you'll say, "Oh, she's waiting for an ad
she's
break."
Waiting for
Introducing
the shade in hers.
So the one thing though that I've also realized, even with my interaction with you off camera, is also the incredible sense of humility that you have. It's actually incredible. Like you're incredibly relatable and humble, and you're a boss at the same time. So I just wanted to know, how does that translate to how you operationalize all of your projects? Because you have several projects. How do you manage people? And what's your management philosophy around business?
Another really good question. I don't know that I've been the best manager lately. I had to check myself. I really did. And I'm not afraid. I'm in a season of checking myself, trust me. It's an interesting thing when you can hold a board meeting with yourself and hold a managerial meeting with yourself and just take stock. And I think in hindsight, I was projecting a lot of what I was going through even into the way I was leading. Because when I think, dealt with some form of trauma and you don't recognize it as such, it manifests in different ways. And looking back, I said, I think I was. So it's been a journey even to just get to where we are. I always think of my foundation when you ask that question, even though there's several projects. But the one thing I tried to do was, build a good team of 1 or 2 people, and sometimes be able to, spread the work or delegate where possible. But more than anything, make people feel safe and heard in your space. Just, again, bottom line, because if there is, you'll always have your difficult people or people who don't have work ethic. But at the end of the day, you want them to leave knowing that they were heard. Even though they didn't want to listen, at least they were still able to speak openly. and that they didn't feel like they left with, workplace trauma. So like what I'm doing, one of the things I'm about to do at the foundation, because we're about to start a really big project, is we're looking for psychosocial support for the people who are working there, just so that you normalize, mental well-being and mental health. And also because for me, I know what psychosocial support has done for me. I know what therapy has done for me. And so that paying it forward. So I think, to answer your question, I do boss, but I think I went through a season where I had to say, oh, you know what, you need to check yourself. You actually need to check yourself and try and do better. And yes, it's high stakes. Sometimes I'd be in projects where I'm maybe one of the few people like me in the space, or if I moderated some seriously global events last year. So that comes with a lot of pressure, and I feel, and I have that anxiety of performing. I'm a high performer and everything. And so sometimes that can be projected, and I realized, find a healthier way to inform people that that's what you need around you. At the time when you need to do something that's high stakes, you need 1, 2, 3, 4. What you don't need to be doing is maybe invalidating what they're trying to do for you because they think it's the right thing, but you're like, dude, what are you doing? You know what I do? So you know what I mean? So I had to check myself, and now I think I'm probably in the best mind space that I've ever been in to be a leader, because now I'm checking all the boxes, like, are you okay, Janet? Start with you and figure out what you need to let go of or what you need to do more of. And then asking them, are you okay? How are you feeling? There's also a fairly new team, so it's great to have like a fresh start and be like, okay, clean slate, let's do this again. And so now I'm ready for the project. It starts next week, actually. And so, yeah, I think that's what it is. I think leadership is sometimes vulnerability, and even admitting to people, hey, I need to say, I could have done that better. I need to take accountability, but so do you. So it's no longer about being obsessed with being perfect and right. And, it's about, I think, what feels right for me, and also making sure that the team I'm leading feels like they're also able to work in an environment where they're allowed to thrive. So I'm a happy boss babe right now.
Turn on the freestyle.
There's a really human element in the advice you gave to people when they're trying to excel. Human elements, very practical things, treating people. In you being a boss, human element. The people you're around, they're humans, they go through things, which is rare, because I think even in the age we're living at now with social media, and when you look at a boss, a lot of the things they're preaching are very toxic. Like, if they're not there, shut the door 4 a.m. It's like, it's taken away the human element. So that's really excellent to see. Now, there's sort of two factors when you look at Janet, right? There's a Janet that was, the career, media, etc. Then there's a Janet I think we're talking to now, which seems to be very much in her purpose, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, that's true.
So how does one make that leap? I asked for this reason. I have a lot of friends at the moment who are making the leap from maybe corporate or doing a job that they weren't like thriving in terms of themselves, and now make a leap into something that they think is more purposeful. That's a scary thing, right?
Yeah.
So I want to find out how you made that leap, because I know one of the things you've mentioned on your site is that you heard a story when it came to girls and like menstruation, and that was like one of the triggering factors. So I want to know, okay, you find a triggering factor, you realize that's the jump I want to take. How did it happen for you? So maybe if someone watching it wants to take that jump as well, they can put it into place.
I think it happened when I was in the newsroom. So I know we'll get into it a bit later. So I'll try and speak to how I made the leap. It's a transition, because again, and okay, what I also like to tell people nowadays is you can start where you are with what you have. And again, that's not just talking air. Literally, when I went for Goalkeepers in 2017, it was one of the biggest conferences I've been to, just because of the kind of people that were in the room. But it was a nice mix of people. It was people who started something by putting out one tweet. Somebody else started something by sharing on their WhatsApp. It's the littlest things. So, and they were trying to say, don't overthink it. If something triggers you, what do you want to do? Because the first thing you do is you say that you're annoyed. So somebody said, I was just annoyed that there was homelessness where I was. I was so upset. And so I put that out there and people were like, I'm upset too. And then together they kind of,
Got it.
you know what I mean? When you put it out there sometimes, or you'll find an organization saying, hey, we're looking for voices like yours. Or sometimes it's just you slowly finding your path into what you can do. So whenever people do ask, I say, there's something that's probably bothering you right around you right now. What is it? Somebody could say, I want to see more boys go to school, for example, or I want to see better, maternal newborn health, or whatever it is. I'm like, there's so many spaces that need you. Check in and find out what they need. Sometimes they need just a basket of something. Sometimes they just need you to go spend some time with people. Sometimes checking on your former primary school and go give a talk. It's the littlest things that can spurn really big change. And so it's not overthinking it, which I think a lot of people, they say, but you have a foundation. Like, it was a journey to get there. And you can also start your foundation, don't get me wrong. But why don't you just start with whatever you can, like what's in your hands? There's a very big conversation around what's in your hands right now. So even somebody watching this, like, what's in your hands? What do you have with you? And that it's, metaphorical as much as it's practical. What do you have with you that you can use? Is it your phone? Is it a little bit of financing that you can send somewhere? Is it your ability to articulate an issue and write it out and put it out? What do you have with you that speaks to you? Because everybody knows that little fire that only they know about. But like, put it out there. And then don't be afraid. Start really small. And then there's this statement I heard this year that really stayed with me from a mentor and a friend. And he said, progress is fragile. That's made things just easier. It's like, there's no, it's fragile. It's going to take a while. Sometimes it's not this automatic big whoop that things change. Sometimes it's investing long-term in the conversation. So, I don't know if I should now go into the foundation.
This is the ideal. That was where I was.
Segue.
We had segued you there.
Figure this out.
You see, I was waiting for the commercial break. And then it's just not coming.
Please tell us about the fantastic social work that you've been doing, and just tell us about everything, because one of the things that I have so many questions, especially around period poverty and how Mantalk can contribute, things like, and then also I also noticed you've done a lot of work on gender-based violence as well. So I wanted to talk about all that now. So please let us begin. Let us start.
Let us start from the beginning.
Let's start from the
Once
beginning.
upon a time.
Yes.
I'll try
Take us from the
from the beginning.
from the beginning.
Sometimes I think I like to take it all the way back again to what I saw around me when I was growing up. There's a really big organization in the coast that deals with rehabilitating street children. And from the time I was a kid, because the woman who started it was friends with my mom and our moms, and so sometimes they would have you just participate in activities. So from a long time ago, I just didn't know it, but I saw social justice from when I was a kid. If you think of now, when I think about it, I was like, it was kind of, shown early enough, and then the other side story is apparently who I'm named after. So my middle name is Wamuni. My maternal grandmother was apparently, I never met her, God rest her soul, but she was very much about social justice. Again, unprovoked. She was just very, and interesting thing is, all of us who are named after her, without knowing it, got into the space. So that's the more like African, proverbial answer, like it's a in the roots type of thing. But I find that very fascinating, because my mom's always like, you're just your grandmother. Like even when you don't want to do it, you're like, I'm done, I want to let it go. She's like, you won't, because it's who you are.
It is who you are named after.
It's who you are named after. So even my cousins, one of them also has an organization in Korogosha. The other one is in the US, but doing social justice. It's very interesting. Same name, all Wamuni.
That's incredible.
So that's not the African answer. Then the other answer is, when I was in the newsroom, when you're in the newsroom, so many issues. You come across all kinds of issues from the stories you read. So every day you're broadcasting, and it's all these, social injustices. But this one stayed with me, I think, because it hit me so hard, because I'd never ever imagined that you'd have to trade or use an unsanitary product to manage a very normal biological function. Because it was 2013. I used to host a show called Monday Special. And before that, there was a feature called Periods of Shame. And I've given this story a lot. But Periods of Shame was basically a story that showed girls in Marigat in Baringo County as an example of hundreds of thousands of other girls who were unable to access sanitary products, so they were using alternatives. The most inexplicable alternatives like goat hide, chicken feathers, leaves, things that you can't even begin to understand how that's an alternative. You just can't.
Yeah.
So that hit me in the gut.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is the war to get that story on air, because many in the newsroom were like, you're going to talk about what?
Really?
Periods?
So how did you come across this story?
So at the time, our boss was Farida Karone. She was the COO. I think that helped, because she was like, I hear all of you, but I'm still going to do it.
Yeah. I love it.
She's like, I hear all of you, but I'm the boss.
Yeah.
So she essentially had to, because people were very uncomfortable because menstruation has always been so taboo.
Yeah.
And so even the men in the newsroom automatically freaked out.
Yeah.
They were like, but why are you going to talk about it on air? She's like, because it's affecting girls where I come from. And so it aired, and Kenyans were up in arms. I remember Twitter for 3 days was just cussing out the government, saying,
I remember.
You remember? They were like,
remember.
how is this not free? Like, why aren't pads free? And I was triggered. So I told my boss, I want to do something. She's like, cool. So came up with it as an initiative to give those girls pads, but also to push for budgetary allocation.
And that's when you came up with the name.
Inua Dada, uplift, as opposed to Saidia or just uplift.
Yeah.
I promised you I'd never have thought I'd be doing it till now. But at the time, I know it planted a seed that's never gone, because when we went and launched it in the same place months later. So the story aired, and then months later we went, because we'd now made it a company call to action, and the first lady got involved. It became this really big thing. Everyone went home, and I was still like, okay, we've given the girls, now what? That's when they were like, okay, you take it, because it's keeping you up at night. But it's because I just felt like this is a platform where we can maybe impact change. And it's just not fair that they're missing school because of a very normal thing. It's totally unfair. They're missing school or getting married early or getting pregnant early because of their period. Really? Something that...
So, and the linkages were direct.
They were direct.
So student performance, for example, because in Kenya, it's a very big deal. Like
There
the
you
high
go.
school you will go to.
Yeah, there you go.
Will
Performance and attendance directly affected.
Yeah.
Because if you're missing out school going days every month, and that's 5 days, do the math for
Yeah.
a whole year.
Jesus.
Almost 2 to 3 weeks worth of school. So you can't perform as much as well as either your other counterpart as a girl who has access or the boys.
Yeah.
You can't. So girls were dropping out at high rates. And then the worst place is having to use unsanitary products, so you get sick.
Yeah.
Or even the worst thing, which we are now seeing a lot more, is this thing that's being called sextortion, which lives in many. There's sex for pads, sex for water, sex for fish. Like, it's transactional for survival.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you don't put basic rights in the hands of people. They have to resort to the worst case scenario just to be able to wear a pad, or go fetch water, or go fetch fish. Like, that's what you're left with.
One of the statistics that was striking, and I remember there was also more outrage from Kenyans recently, was the coronavirus increase in teenage pregnancies.
Exactly.
So it might actually be contributing.
A lot of it is contributing, because again, with school where there's supposed to be distribution of sanitary pads, which has been very ad hoc. The government means well, it's just very ad hoc. But some girls were benefiting. Then the schools shut down. So what were they doing? They were trading themselves for pads, and they were getting pregnant.
So when the schools shut down during the coronavirus, the government services did not
continue.
And was a budgetary allocation made for that same year for those same
much
things?
later? Because I remember that's the noise we started making is, excuse me, pandemic, but also periods are there. So you can't have these care packages and not have menstrual products.
Yeah.
So like our foundation and many others just started putting together dignity kits.
Yeah.
And care packages and sending out to as many people, just so that they could at the very least, because the thing is, when you have access to products during your menstruation, and for those for whom it's the bare minimum you can do, you're able to then think about many other things. You're able to think through, what's my next step in terms of work? What's my next step in terms of planning for my family? At least I don't have to think about, and you see the reason why period poverty exists, because these products are very expensive. For the average person, yes, but even for us, they're just period products are expensive.
Are they subsidized by
They're supposed to be, but it doesn't reflect in the pricing. Kenya has done so much in terms of pioneering policies to do with menstrual health. We're actually called the Scotland of Africa, because Scotland has free sanitary pads.
Yeah.
But I'm like, "Kwa ground, I don't know. There's a
Wait.
I know you're like, let me do this math.
Yeah, because you see now
Where does it-
you've taken it somewhere where the
Where's it
mathematics is
going?
not
Where's
mathematics.
it going?
Wait, so let's get there.
Yeah.
There was an annual budget read for under education,
Yes.
and sanitary pads is part of the budget.
Yeah.
And this was read in 20. Let's assume it's the year before, which is 2019. Are we saying that in 2020, those pads that were budgeted for and there was an allocation were not released to?
No, and the proof is on the ground.
Jesus.
The other day, the Cabinet Secretary for Education said, and I remember his numbers, he said 3.7 billion shillings has been spent to give sanitary pads to over 7 million girls. So we're doing our work. And so earlier I was speaking to two menstrual champions and they just got so triggered. They're like, that's not true. We're not seeing it. I was like, I'm just reading. I'm just reading what he's saying because it's important we link what the policymakers are saying. The truth is the translation and implementation has too many bottlenecks, whether it's corruption, whether it's just the knowledge of not having, what's a word we like to use? Task force. Not having a group who can help you carry out the implementation. So the thought is good. Even when we look at gender equality, let's start with the fight to enhance gender equality in Kenya. I mean, President Kenyatta became a big example that was being used during the Generation Equality Forum last year. They'd be like, you see, in Kenya, the president has made, commitments to end gender-based violence. And it's true. And we applauded him because it's not often that you see an African head of state saying, this is how we're going to end gender-based violence. All great on paper. Implementation, it goes up in smoke. So the same thing for sanitary pads. The budget allocation is there. The goodwill is there. The implementation is just completely interfered with because of so many. Unfortunately, a lot of it is corruption. I think it's just one of these diseases that is so intrinsically in the system that it just doesn't matter what it is. And so part of it is that. Part of it is, again, not having a plan. Okay, now you have the pads. Do you know how hard it is to have a sustainable program about giving out pads to girls every month? You need an entire machine.
Distribution
channels. There you go. Yeah. So if you haven't strengthened all those, but you've said, we have 7 million girls that we've given pads. A lot of them, I was in Korogosho yesterday, and I'm in different spaces every time. I'm like, when was the last time you got pads? And they'll think and say, maybe a year ago. So maybe.
So it's one.
Or some people will say, we got them, but they were only for 3 months. So it's not also, there's no uniform approach to it. So again, I'll always say the goodwill is there. Like we have a menstrual health policy that was launched in 2020. It's one of the few from Africa. So we're like progressive in the sense of we're now embracing it as a need. We're talking about it. I was in a room the other day where there was all these men I was emceeing and it was about sanitation. And like, you know what, fun. Men, clap for yourselves because all of you here have said periods. And they really laughed because I'm like, I didn't see this in 2014. I didn't see this much investment in wanting girls to go back to school. So I was so touched. I almost got emotional. I'm like, this is so great to see. Then I asked them, so what happens? And they say all that kind of things. We need to be given more support. So while all that is happening, there's a girl right now considering trading sex for pads. That's what really upsets me. It's like, okay, we're all talking, but what are we actually doing? But you can't have the impact without the advocacy. And I think that's why I do this. That's why all these incredible menstrual champions and advocates, it's power to say this and to say it in a way that some of the things Dada has been able to achieve is, I think we mainstreamed the conversation because we brought it from mainstream media at a time when it was taboo. It shifted everything. That periods of shame feature, it's still talked about. Because, first of all, parliamentarians were embarrassed. So they increased the budgetary allocation after that. The beginning of drafting the menstrual policy began in 2015, about a year and a half after that. You see what it did? Yeah. When you mainstream issues, that's what happens. When you do things on platforms like this, that's what happens. Because people know. Everyone was like, I didn't know that. Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And then from there now, a lot of other organizations have come up and they're doing such great work. Yeah. We still continue. We lead a lot with advocacy, which for me is this education.
Exactly.
I love doing it. I sleep, eat, and breathe it. I did it through my book. I'm doing it through a podcast. I do it through some of what we do in the community in terms of just education awareness. I've done it through a menstrual health conference that I convened just before COVID. So when you do that, it spurs people into action because now you've given them the education and they're like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. How can I help? Yeah. So you have to keep the conversation going. And so one of the reasons when I was asked, why are you doing the podcast? I'm like, because we need to normalize this as a daily conversation. I feel like we wait for Menstrual Hygiene Day, which is on May 28th, by the way, since 2014. Then there's so much noise and all these events, then everyone goes quiet.
Sustain that convo.
And then October 11th, Day of the Girl. Then March 8th, Women's Day. But I'm like, no. That's fantastic. What's happening in between?
Because every day there's somebody trading sex for
that's the
buds.
reality.
There you go.
Now,
That's the soundbite. Weka kwa program.
yeah. Like it's actually like, you know, like it's such a...
It's insane to think
Yeah,
about
like
it.
it hits you, and
It
you're
really
like,
does.
It's jarring. Like it's
Yeah.
literally like...
and it doesn't have to be. That's the more frustrating thing is that doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah.
I think, okay, fine, Scotland and New Zealand, yes, we can talk about them being progressive, but no, they actually say, imagine we care about menstruating girls and women, so we're going to give them products. That's what they did. And so Scotland, sanitary pads are going to be made available for all women and girls. Because period poverty is global, by the way. It's not just Kenya, Africa. It's India, it's South America, it's
India.
it's UK, it's Los Angeles, it's everywhere. There's always a woman somewhere who's trying to figure out, do I put food on the table or do I buy a pad? That's always the biggest conversation, because even for them in LA and the US, it's expensive. So they've been fighting for tampon tax. So everybody has a different war against poverty. Theirs is just like, remove the tax. So in many states, they're now lifting tampon tax. In some US universities, they're putting sanitary products for students. But you have to care enough to say they deserve this. I sometimes feel like, do you just not care enough about us that you're like, figure it out. See us, we're here putting the policy, we can't do everything. Like, no, if you really cared, you'd think about that little girl who's 12 or 13, who can't go to school, who is vulnerable, who can then be easily assaulted, and that's where you've left her life.
That's the problem.
13 and that's it.
For me, where the problem is, of course, is the hygiene, the sanitary considerations, but also the fact that you're actually enabling sexual predation. You're an enabling factor.
In fact, when you say that, I'm like, it's spot on. It's the way, even for gender-based violence, it's unfortunately been socially normalized because of culture, but I think at the end of the day, if people say we're going to attack this and take it on head on in a way that is unapologetic and it's going to take everything for us to do this, it means that you care enough. But when you're not saying that, you're like, in the grander scheme of things, it's there in the food chain.
It will continue to happen.
Of priorities, but it's also because we're not, I think we're just not taking enough time to throw a lot of this also needs resourcing. I now get that. Having been in social justice a few years, I'm like, I get why you actually need to put resources behind programs that educate, that safe houses. Like, safe houses should be normal. I mean, it's also sad to say that because it means you're almost, not addressing the root cause. But while we're trying to figure out how to reverse behavioral change, there's still very vulnerable people who are in a house with a predator who's harming them. So why can't we find them a safe space as we figure out the long-term plan? And so I think as I kind of try to wrap up this journey part of the foundation, so it's been advocacy, and then now we're doing something with the pad project where we're going to be teaching women how to make pads because then they're able to earn something, but also the pads which are made are able to be distributed. It's sustainable in the sense that it's a machine and it can churn out upwards of 100 to 200 pads a day.
Wow.
But it's really for communities. It's a program that was born out of a collaboration between folks in India and the US. Period, end of sentence. It's a documentary on Netflix. It won an Oscar in 2019. So we're collaborating with them, and it's been amazing. But we're starting the project next week. So that's our solution, as in Wadada, in a way. We're like, we're making noise, but we're also trying to get pads in the hands of girls and money in the hands of their moms, who can then be able to buy for their family.
The question I have for you is how many sanitary pads do you think Wadada has done since it's distributed and submitted to?
That is such a good question.
How many do you think you've done so far? Since you left the newsroom.
That's a very that's a tough one. I know that when we do it every year from 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Probably by that time, we'd impacted over 10,000 girls. But then COVID came, and then we went into also supporting families first, because I'm like, it doesn't really matter. COVID affected everyone. So we made sure families were getting care packages so that the parents and everyone. And then we gave almost 3,000, I think, and period kits in there. So if that's the math, maybe 15, maybe more, 1,000 to date. Because recently we started a pad drive at the center from March 8th. And we've intervened to about 150, 200 girls and women. So it's quite a number. I have the numbers somewhere. I'll text you.
Listen.